Hello, everybody. I am Drew Duncan, and you are listening to the Stank 57 Sports Show. Plenty to get to. We're going to be talking a little bit about the Patriots and Bears game, but mainly in conjunction with this weird NFL season that we're having. And I think that we're all in agreement about that. The season is just weird. It's different, man. In fact, going into Week 7, it is the first time since the 32-team merger and expansion since 2012, I should really point out, that 10 teams, it's the most, 10 teams are 3-3 or were 3-3 going into Week 7. Last time that happened was 2012. The closest year to that was 2013 with 9. Rams, 49ers, Seahawks, Bucks, Falcons, Packers, Bengals, Ravens, Dolphins, and the Pats all going into this week were 3-3. We're going to be talking about some things that led into it. Obviously, free agency. We're going to be talking about quarterback play, defensive play. I'm going to drop some crazy stats on you guys. Let's get into it. So one of the things that I really noticed was points, right? And I thought to myself, it can't just be Denver. I know that Denver's offense has been bad, but do you realize that in the 4 primetime games that the Broncos have played in, neither them or their opponent have scored 20 points? In fact, this is the lowest margin of points that we've seen since the 2017 season, which is at 21.8 currently. One of the other things that kind of blew my mind was with all the close games, of the 94 games that have been played through Week 6, 74 within one score in the fourth quarter, which is an NFL record. In fact, 32 games have had big fourth quarter comebacks, and teams that have trailed by double digits have rallied to win 18 games, which basically boils down to 3 per week. Why isn't he lead safe? Why is it they're getting up big and not able to finish off games? Look, me personally, I would like to say that the defenses have a huge part in what is going on with the offensive side in the NFL right now. I think you've got 6 teams, the Broncos, the Rams, the Colts, etc. The Bengals, they're in there. Off the top of my head, that have given up more than 20 sacks so far in this NFL season. So you could say it's defensive schemes. You could also say that it's all the free agency and trade stuff that has happened. The AFC West was a perfect example of this. The Raiders let go of Zay Jones, who I thought was their best wide receiver, and they were willing to make room so that way they could get Devontae Adams. You take a look at the Denver Broncos, obviously going after Russell Wilson. You have the Indianapolis Colts over there in the other division in the AFC. They went out and they got Matty Ice, hoping that they could turn it around, thinking that Carson Wentz was the worst thing that had ever happened to him. I always divert back to the Odell Beckham Jr. situation, though. And I say that because one of the things that I talk about when all that happened was schematically and in the locker room, how was that going to work out for the Cleveland Browns? And when he got hurt, I said that they were a better football team without him before anybody else did. And the proof was in the pudding because they went to the AFC Championship game that season. They were just better without him. Why? Because they didn't have a coach that understood how to use him to his full potential. You can talk about Baker Mayfield all you want to. I'm not willing to completely disagree with that. But I will say that overall, the game planning was so focused around one guy at wide receiver that they really didn't take the time, I don't think, to worry about the scheme and how they can incorporate other guys so that way the plays could be there for them too, which would then open up Odell Beckham Jr. for more one-on-one situations. So it didn't work out for him. So while you could say it's the defense and the defensive lines, I mean, obviously we're seeing a lot of batted balls. We're seeing a lot of turnovers because they're playing, deep coverages now and daring teams to throw it over the top. And they're disguising their coverages so well. And a lot of teams are using these stack defensive formations now because they're relying on more speed and guys flying over the football. And then they're just letting the defensive line just bull rush everybody. We are seeing the difficulty in finding a good offensive line, the players that work in the right scheme, and then you start looking at all the different coaching things that have gone on. All the moving parts and pieces. Hackett out of Green Bay. How good has Green Bay been without Hackett? But conversely, how good has Denver been with Hackett? Goal line offense, let's, throw it 3 different times in a row. Now, obviously, I would argue that Denver fumbled the football inside of the red zone so many times that Hackett didn't even trust his running backs anymore, put it in the hands of his quarterback, and the quarterback flailed. But I would also argue that Denver's offense has struggled because of Hackett. Just because it worked for Aaron Rodgers does not mean it's going to work for Russell Wilson. Then you've got Josh McDaniels with the Raiders. What he did in New England may or may not work for one guy, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for the rest. So that's been a thing. You've got wide receivers, defensive players, offensive players moving all over the NFL. And then on top of that, you've got coaches going all over the NFL. I mean, Frank Reich has been one of the few consistencies that we've seen in the NFL outside of Andy Reid, but Andy Reid has been extremely successful. And even then, they lost some moving parts. But another thing that begins to add up is running the football and being consistent with it. You see, it makes it harder for defenses when they have to start accounting for the run. And they don't have to just account for the pass anymore, where defensive players just bull rush, and then when it looks like the quarterback's about to throw, smartly, I might add, get their hands up, bat the ball, create tip plays. We saw it tonight with Chicago where they were getting interceptions. We see these teams lose. They're bad in the turnover differential, and the defense is making the difference in a lot of these games. And that's how a lot of these teams are getting back into these games. And that's how some of the teams are very good, even though they really have a mid QB, i.e. Dallas. Don't talk to me about Dak Prescott. He's only a level or two above Cooper Rush. That defense forced 5 turnovers against the Detroit Lions, and they only scored 24 points in that game. So you start combining all these different things, and you look at it and you go, that's an issue. All the sacks, the inability to block up front, it shows you how good or how difficult it is to find a good offensive line. Conversely, how important it is to have a very good offensive line. Hell, Tom Brady said, I think there's a lot of bad football this season, right? He just said it's poor quality of football, and of course he would know because the Bucs have been a poor quality of football. It's been combined effort on these teams. You look at what happened with Tampa Bay and Tom Brady, people are saying, well, he shouldn't have come back. The guy was over 40 years old, throwing more 40 touchdown passes just a season ago. But the Bucs got a new coach. See? It's amazing how quickly that can change things, isn't it? Then, of course, Mike Evans with the drop around the world. I mean, everybody saw that play happen. Look at the Broncos and all the fumbles and turnovers. We saw it again tonight, right, with the New England Patriots, them turning the football over. Everybody had Zappe fever. Well, that lasted for about 3 minutes of football. And even then, that was a hell of a catch by Myers. That pass really had little to do with Zappe and everything to do with blown coverage and a wide open guy down the field. How somebody gets that open is beyond me. But regardless, The Bears were able to make that adjustment. They forced a lot of turnovers. There was a fumble that happened, right, obviously. And even though they themselves were struggling in the turnover margin, ultimately their defense put themselves in a good position, and they were able to come back and win the game and keep their playoff hopes alive. I think we can all agree that, injuries also play in part. Look what happened with Tua. Russell Wilson is out now in Denver, and I understand they weren't playing good before that, but, how good are they going to be with Rippon? Matt Ryan has been reportedly playing injured. Yeah, sure, 9 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, 1-to-1 ratio, but again, the sack margin. Sure, he's had fumbles, but, he's constantly under the gun. What is Sam Ehlinger going to do? And I love Ehlinger. I said long before anybody else that I felt like he was an NFL caliber football player. But when an offensive line can't block, now what are you doing? You're relying on a mobile quarterback to hopefully be able to get out of situations, i.e. Russell Wilson, i.e. Lamar Jackson. And I've always said that the backup quarterback is the most popular player on the team. But it's only worked out in very few occasions, right? Brett Favre did it when he was with the Green Bay Packers. He got traded away from Atlanta. He ends up coming in. He has a big comeback. And from then on, the rest is history. Now, I know what you feel about him for what's gone on outside of professional football. And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm talking about what he did on the field. Tom Brady came in, obviously replaced Drew Bledsoe. The Patriots weren't that good, but he came in and made a huge difference. Donovan McNabb, he came in, ended up replacing the quarterback that was in front of him, which I believe at the time was Doug Peterson, but it wasn't until McNabb's second year when he took over officially as the offensive quarterback starter that the Eagles really turned it around. So there's instances where it has worked, but a lot of times it hasn't. And people may point to Dak Prescott and say, oh, yeah, look at what he did when he took over for Tony Romo. Last I checked, Dak hasn't sniffed a Super Bowl. And if it's going to be a season that he can do it, it's going to be this year with that defense. It rarely ever works out. Look at the Denver Broncos. They've tried to bring in quarterback after quarterback, Lynch, Simeon. Honestly, the best quarterback that they've had since John Elway was Jay Cutler. Now, I know somebody out there is going to talk about the snake, and that's fine, but they got obliterated in an AFC championship game, and he had this weird stat where rolling out, he was completing like 90% of his passes, but dropping back was like 13%. It was bizarre. So bizarre. It rarely ever works out. Rarely. I don't think we can count Mahomes because they traded away Alex Smith after, by the way, what was an 11-5 season. They just got beat in the playoffs, and they traded Alex Smith over to Washington and said, okay, new season, new start, Mahomes is going to be the guy. You can't say Aaron Rodgers because Brett Favre was trying to come out of retirement again, and they finally said, dude, we're done waiting. We're done trying to, figure out what you're going to do. We've given you enough respect in this organization. We're moving on. And they went with Aaron Rodgers at the beginning of the season. I'm not talking about in the middle of the year. It's October. The Colts are 3-1, and they're going with a backup quarterback. A third-string quarterback, mind you. They're bypassing Foles. It hardly ever truly works out. There are some instances when it has, but you go look down the list, you could talk to Cleveland Browns fan about how often plugging in a new quarterback actually ends up working out for you. Rarely does it really ever work. The quarterback does not fix everything on a football team. What works for one player will not work for another player necessarily. And, Russell Wilson's been having to learn all these new things under Hackett. There's just so many things. All these things combined, the free agency, the trades, the coaching carousel, you get to know these players, you learn how to use them over a period of time, and that was what made Green Bay so good, was developing their players from the draft. But a lot of teams don't follow that moniker, and I understand. These teams' jobs is to go out and get the best player possible, okay? But getting the best player possible does not necessarily mean it's the right guy for your ball club. Whether it's the locker room, whether it's the schematics, whatever the case may be, it doesn't always work out. And it doesn't take long to figure it out. There are obviously rare exceptions. You had Tom Brady go to the Buccaneers. It worked out, but now there's a new coach. How's that going, as I pointed out earlier? So there's that. In terms of the Monday night game, blowout is what it ended up being. Zappe Mania is over, even though he's probably going to be the guy going forward. What are you supposed to do? The Bears defense did their job ultimately. Do I think Zappe's going to be horrendous going forward? Who the hell knows? Nobody's got a crystal ball. But ultimately, Chicago played really good. Justin Fields getting it done with his legs, made some really difficult throws, particularly on that flat out where, how he snapped that ball out of there just is beyond me. I don't think I've ever seen a quicker release on any quarterback than what happened in that moment. And Dan Marino had a hell of a release, but man, just flung that thing out there. And then, of course, from there, guy went out and made a play. And, the Bears took advantage of the turnovers that they got, which is what you're supposed to do. The defense is supposed to create opportunities and stop the other team. And the offense took advantage of that. Pretty simple. All right. This is football basics 101. Okay. And I think that the Bears are slowly but surely learning how to use Fields. But again, defensively, when you are able to create opportunities, that usually wins you the football game. Obviously, the Broncos have had a bad roll this year, but in terms of that game tonight, it's pretty cut and dry. And they tried to bring somebody in. It didn't work out for the Patriots. And now, there's going to be a coaching decision that'll need to be made going forward into the next week. So we'll see how things work out. I don't think the Patriots are going to be that good. I saw a guy who was just like, yeah, New England's going to be able to beat Buffalo and go to a Super Bowl. After watching that, if anybody thinks New England's going to make the playoffs, seriously. All right. I am Drew Duncan. Quick recap. For me, honestly, the thing that will always do it in the NFL, the thing that will always do it is having a good quarterback, a really solid run game, one really good wide receiver who fits what you do perfectly, and then a defense that can get the job done. Tale as old as time. All these superstar football teams, it's so hard to buy a championship, guys. It really is. All the free agency, all the coaching moves, defensive, offensive players all over the place. It just, it just takes the right situation. It really does. And, it rarely works out going to the next quarterback. But we'll see how the season continues to play out. Again, going into this year, 10 teams had a 3-3 record going into week 7. Only one other time that's happened, and that was in 2012. That's been 10 years ago. Lowest point margin this season in 5 years, 21.8 a game. More double-digit lead blowns this year, averaging 3 per week, 18 times. NFL record going into the fourth quarter this year in over 70 games. Unbelievable, where the game was within 4 points. Look at the Ravens. I think their losses collectively total 11 points. Good grief. The Broncos, 4 primetime games, and none of the teams have put up at least 20 points in any of those 4 games. Just wow. Bears, Patriots. Bears run away with it. They do what they're supposed to do. New England's got a quarterback problem on their hand going into their next week. We'll see what Belichick does. Again, I maintain Brady made that guy look really good for a long time. I am Drew Duncan. This is the Sync 57 Sports Show. We are wherever you are listening to podcasts. Tell your device to play us on Google, Spreaker, iHeart, iTunes, etc., etc. We are wherever you are listening to podcasts. And as always, stay safe and take care of yourselves.